Welcome to the Healing Pathway, Part 4, the healing practice of sacred bonds and the psychology of a loss. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Part 4 of the Healing Pathway presentations. Today, I want to talk with you a bit about how it is that we heal from losses psychologically. What happens to us when we receive some kind of an emotional wound in our lives and we can't seem to find a way to recover from it? And then secondly, I want to talk about a couple of the major gifts, the most important gifts that we are given to heal. And so we'll begin with the practice, the first healing practice that I will talk about. It's actually the third practice in the journal. And this practice is the practice of establishing, deepening, discovering the sacred bonds in your life, which of course are essential to heal. So let's begin with a discussion of what actually happens after we receive this serious emotional wound from which we're struggling to recover. The first thing is, of course, a realization that we're struggling and that we're having a hard time recovering. But deeper than that is a realization that we are, as the Taoists would say, impaled on two opposites. Now, the opposites are introduced very early in our lives. And any of you who have had kids or been around kids or grandkids will realize that there's a certain bliss. There's also a lot of pain, but a general sense of bliss in almost all children that lasts up until about age 4. It's as if God was alive in them, right? Energy is flowing out of every pore of their bodies. And they run and they throw themselves on the floor and roll just out of pure happiness. And then what happens is we send them to school. And I mean that in a figurative sense. What we have to do, unfortunately, what we have to do is we have to begin to introduce opposites into their lives. Safe behavior and unsafe behavior. Male versus female, or male and female. Good behavior or bad behavior. All these different kinds of boundaries and opposites and different things that they start to have to deal with. And then if we go to school, they get taught more and more of these opposites in life, the things that split them. And then we begin to see a sort of change. Many of the kids keep that joy, keep that happiness. But gradually they have to learn that sitting in their seat and behaving is better than running on the playground, and they can't make decisions anytime they want to make them. And at home, they have to learn the differences between hot and cold and bedtime and not bedtime and all these different things that we have to introduce into their lives. Now, the reason that I bring all that up is that because it's the same opposites that we get impaled on, again, as the Taoists would say, when we are the subject of one of these wounds, one of these events in our lives. And the opposite goes something like, let's say there's a death, unexpected death in the family, or a tragic death or something like that. And the opposite then is, on one hand, wanting that relationship to still be there. And on the other hand, the realization that it's not and it never will be. And we're stuck on those opposites. And we can't seem to move from them. Okay? Or perhaps it's a divorce. And the child has this realization that Dad's not here. I want him here. Right? Those are opposites. I want not to miss him, but I do miss him. You see, we have these kind of opposites as a way of understanding or a way of explaining what has happened to us. Now, there are resolutions to that. The Taoists, and I will talk about them a bit here because they are the instrumental factor in having introduced this philosophy, this psychology into the world. Now, the religion of Taoism is a very ancient religion and became for a long time subsumed under Buddhism. They sort of blended together, melded together. But in the last 20 years, 50 years, I don't know how long, but in a short period of time, the Taoism has freed itself and become again a standalone approach to life. And it has done that because of some very instrumental writers, I think, on one hand, but also because it has this to offer. Taoism talks about the opposites. And the original text of Taoism is the Tao Te Ching. Okay, so you can get it just a simple translation like this one, or you can get an elaborate and actually very beautiful translation like this. So, and I don't know why, but it seems like a lot of spiritual books want to be made very beautifully. Okay, I think people invest in them, and that's the reason that they are that way. But what the Tao Te Ching basically starts off and goes all the way through, it's a very simple book, and it simply opposes one thing versus another. So in every couple of sentences, there is an included opposite. And the whole thing blends itself together then into a complete philosophy, a complete approach to how we solve these problems. Now, what the Taoists say, this is very important now, is that the solution to being impaled on these opposites is to put ourselves right in the middle. Right in the middle. Okay? So we have one opposite on one side, one opposite on the other side, and we put ourselves right smack in the middle of it. And we stay there. And we stand the tension. And we know that we want this. And we know that we don't want that. But we don't go in either direction. Okay? We keep ourselves in the middle. Why? Why would we do that? Well, what the Taoists discovered, Kirchhoff later on wrote about this extensively. And as I'll talk about in a minute, Jesus also talked about it extensively, beautifully. What happens is that a healing third emerges. A healing third. From the two opposites, a healing third emerges. All right? And the third, once it emerges, is the solution to the two. And it works, and it does work. And in doing couples work, I have done this kind of work where I have said, okay, this is your position, Mr. Whoever, and this is your position, Mrs. Whoever. I want you, Mr., to find out everything you possibly can about her position from her. I want every detail, every single thing you can find out about it, which forces him to move to the middle. You can't ask questions from over here. You have to come to the middle to ask questions. Of course, I guess she gets the same assignment about him. And it's a very powerful strategy, very powerful strategy for making people come together and allowing this healing third to emerge. Now, what happens when the healing third emerges? Now, this is Kirchhoff's work. When the healing third emerges, and we have these two opposites, and they stay there long enough, the three of them, what happens is it all solidifies into a fourth. This is by Kirchhoff's work, is called the fourth way sometimes, a third way or a fourth way. Anyway, the process is one that is a gift that we're given. Now, if we look at, again, these opposites, Jesus addresses them very directly. And Jesus does something that a lot of the other religions don't do. And what he does is he interjects himself right smack in the middle of the whole thing. So whereas Taoism says you must stand the tension between the opposites, and that's what Jung said too, stand the tension between the opposites. Jesus puts himself in the middle of it. And Jesus said, blessed are you when you mourn, for you shall be comforted. Now, mourning and being comforted, of course, are the opposites. And he lists in the Beatitudes, he lists the ones that are the most difficult for us to deal with. All right? But if we simply rephrase or put into a different tense what Jesus is saying, he could be saying it like this. I, Jesus, will be blessing you when you mourn, and the gift that you can expect from me is my comforting. Okay? So the Beatitudes can be read that way. Jesus is speaking, so he is saying, I will be blessing you. Blessed will you be, blessed are you. And then he goes ahead and deals with the opposite. And so in the Beatitudes, Jesus just condenses it all. And the thing, like I said, and he does this over and over again, is he puts himself in the middle of it. He puts himself in the middle of it. And so, in that way, why does he do that? It makes the whole thing so much more personal for us. Just as instead of achieving nirvana, he suffers on the cross. Makes it very personal. He knows that we have these these conflicts and that they are alive in our bodies. And so that's what he does for us. Anyway, we can now move on and talk about that. So when we have these losses and the opposites, happen and all that takes place, what happens in us is that emotions are created. Now, let's go ahead and define an emotion. Emotion. If you take the word apart, E means outward, like exit or evict, or lots of words that start with E that, basically have some outward focus to them. And motion, of course, means motion. Okay, active motion. So emotion means outward motion. These things that are happening inside of us are designed to move outwardly. They're designed to move outwardly. That's what emotion means. All right? They're not meant for us to hold them inside. They're not meant for us to have to suppress them. Now, you remember a couple times ago, I started to talk about this tender place inside that we all have. So let's take a look at that diagram again, and let's talk about what actually goes into that tender place as far as how we're now talking about emotions and how they move. Here's the diagram again of the human experience of how we care for ourselves. And again, I want to focus at the innermost circle, the area of tenderness. We also will be talking today about a couple of ways in which you can activate the area of gentleness that is so important. But today I want to talk with you about tenderness, because tenderness is the place where emotions, wounds and emotions come to live. And if they're strong enough, they can cloud out all that it is that we are trying to do to take care of ourselves. So let's talk a little bit now about that innermost area of our lives. When we have a wound, there are two things that can happen to it. One is that, as I have explained, in emotion, the wound can have an outward motion. It can move out of us. And all of the healing practices and pretty much everything that I want to talk about in this series is going to be about that, how it is that we can heal, have the emotion move away from us, and in this course, into the spiritual. But what happens when it doesn't? And as I have just started to explain, it goes into this inner place inside. Now, how does it go there? It doesn't just go there, right? We have to do something to make it go there. And that something is called, in psychology, suppression or repression, or both. Now, what these words mean simply is that we must take some of the energy, the psychic energy, psychological energy we have to keep it buried, to keep it down. So we use some of our energy then to force these things into the unconscious, or as I have called it, the area of tenderness inside. We force them down. So, maybe you go to a party and you say something really stupid, right? Or really embarrassing, and you don't even recognize until after it's, been said how bad it was. And you get in the car and you're on your way home and you think about it. It comes up in your mind and you do one of these, right? You force it out of your thoughts, out of your awareness. Well, you do that to push it away so that you don't have to think about it right then. And it works, right? If you have enough energy, it works. Now, incidentally, you may be driving along 6 months from then, and it's, you've been driving for hours, maybe you're on a trip somewhere, and it's quiet. All of a sudden, here comes that embarrassing memory. I know I'm not the only one this has ever happened to. There's that memory again. Now you can do two things. You can do one of those again and make it go away. But here's the important thing to know about that. If that memory has come up at that time, it's come up in perfect timing to be healed. If it comes into your awareness, then it means that you have enough strength. You can say to yourself, yeah, okay, so I did something stupid. You can accept yourself. You can ease up on yourself. And then what happens when you do that is, when you heal, is energy gets released. Now, this energy that you're using, or that a person is using to keep down these events in life that they can't deal with, is very important energy. It's the energy we use to make friends, to do our work, if you're a child, to go to school and to learn, to have avocations, and so on. It's our energy, it belongs to us. So we don't want to have too many of these suppressions. Now, here's the problem. If you're a child and you're in an abusive situation, or you're having to tolerate a parent who is out of control emotionally, and or distant and unavailable, these are all losses for a child. You can't go to school in tears every day, right? You can't go to school angry. You can't fight on the playground every day to try to express, whatever it is that continues to be abusive at home. So what do? Well, you might take all the energy you can muster, all the energy you can find, and you jam it into keeping all that stuff that's going on down and out of your awareness into that place of tenderness. So the tenderness area gets even more tender, but also filled with all these emotions. Now, emotions, as we have said, live in the body. They live in the body, and we'll be talking about that in just a moment, because I want to give you the first of two healing practices today involving that area of tenderness. So we want as little of this repressed energy as possible. And so let's go ahead now and talk about what it is that two practices that we can use to begin to look at this healing of emotional needs that we have. The first, again, remember the diagram, the tenderness diagram. And this is has to begin with the acknowledgement that emotions live in the body, because they do. Okay, you can't think your emotions, right? I've said this before. You can have a thought that triggers an emotion, but your emotions live in the body. If you're sad, your eyes will begin to tear up. If you're angry, your muscles will tighten. Blood will rush to your extremities. Adrenaline begins to flow into your veins. These are all anger responses, right? They're ways for you to prepare for fight or flight. All right. The same way sadness produces tears, maybe even sobbing. These are ways for your body to experience emotions. You don't do that with your mind. All right. So what we're going to do now is I want you to take a few minutes, and I'm going to keep talking, so you can pause this if you're wanting to do that. But take a few minutes and locate the place in your body where your emotions live. Okay? They will have a location. For many of us, it's in the solar plexus. For some of us, it's in the stomach. For some of us, it's in the chest. Those are the usual areas. But locate the place in your body where your emotions live. Now, that place has to become that inner circle that also contains tenderness. Also, there will be some positive emotions in there, maybe hidden. Joy is an emotional experience. Love. There should be some of that in that place for you too. Now, I want you to imagine that inner place is a room inside of you. And what I want you to do is I want you to go to that room. Notice that there's a door there, but there's also a chair sitting outside the room. And I want you just to have a seat in that chair for now. And I want you, with your imagination, to sense everything you can that's in that room. Could be words, certainly will be words, some of it, but it also could be symbols, could be memories, could be actual emotions that want to well up in you now as you're thinking about them, as you're doing this exercise with me. I want you to remember them, as many as you can. And then I don't want you to do anything else. Later on, we'll look into the room. We'll open the door a crack and look into the room, but not now. For now, just notice anything surprising in there. Is there a symbol that you never saw before? Is there a dream experience that all of a sudden comes to your memory? Is there a childhood experience that you have lived over and over again? Any of these things. It could be any of a 1,000 different forms of communication to you from this inner place inside. And as I said, notice also the areas that are positive, the areas of joy, of happiness, memories of happiness, um, experiences of healing, any of those things. Remember them too. Try to remember as much as you can. And then now when you finish this, I want you immediately to sit down with your journal and just write one word um, triggers that will help you remember what those experiences were. And I'll stop that exercise now. We'll continue it later. One of the things you need to do to heal is to become very familiar with that inner place in you, comfortable even with that inner place, even with the pain that's there, even with the suffering. Now, there is a second gift that I want to talk with you about today, and it includes this discussion of emotions, because it is the most practical, I'm sure, gift that we are given, and that is the gift of sacred bonds. Now, a sacred bond is a relationship. And if I can have you look one more time at this diagram that I showed you last time about the Christian Trinity, it will help me to explain to you what I mean by these sacred relationships. The last time I showed you this diagram, called the Shield of the Trinity, I focused on the relationships between the Trinity members and God. This time, I want you to notice more the lines between them, because the lines represent a flow of energy. And the point with showing you this diagram is that the whole thing, and there are many theologians that talk about this, the point of the Trinity is that the relationships between the members of the Trinity are constantly flowing with energy, and they infuse more and more energy into each other as they just exist. And so what I'm trying to show you here is that these triangles, these trinities in our lives are a great source of energy. And I want to teach you later in the course about how to form these trinities for yourself and create healing triads in your personal life. But for now, allow me to show you a personal triangle that has been very meaningful for me, that I discovered much earlier in my life. One day on a wilderness trip, I was struck by the beauty of what was around me, and I started to wonder about it. And I noticed that there needed to be three components present in order for the wilderness to produce this kind of beauty. And the components were emptiness, humility, and silence. And when emptiness, humility, and silence were all present, beauty was constellated. Now, constellated simply means that it was a creation that occurred. It's a creation that I noticed that occurred when certain components were present. These trinities, these triangles, live all around us and they live in us. And it's very important. And as I said, will be doing a complete session on creating these inner triangles, finding them, and releasing the energy that they have, which is tremendous healing energy for us. Okay, after a foray there into trinities, triads, it is now time to finish the sacred bond discussion. So, of course, part one of that discussion was the Trinity for Christians. But in any faith, the most important relationships, healing relationships, sacred bonds that we are given are the spiritual ones. I've talked about that many times. And so in Christianity, we have relationships with all members of the Trinity. And the point of this discussion of sacred bonds is that in order to heal, we must deepen and strengthen the relationships we have with the sacred bonds that we are given, the sacred bonds in our lives. And of course, so for a Christian, it would be strengthening, deepening our relationship with Father, Son, Spirit, God, those parts of the Trinity. In other faiths, it would be deepening, strengthening relationships with the spiritual givers, leaders in those faiths. So for Buddhists, the strengthening may be in meditation practice. You know, how do I make that longer, deeper? And so on. For other faiths, it might be in certain sects of Buddhism. How empty can I make my soul? How much emptiness can I achieve in my meditation practice, and so on. The next level is sacred bond relationships that are ordained by the spiritual. So almost every faith in the world, I believe every faith, has a sacred ordination of the marriage relationship. Okay, it's a part of every faith that I know of. But there also is the ordination of pastors and priests with expectations that they are going to spiritually care for the people that are in their care. Between parents and children, when children are promised to the church or promised by parents that they will care for and raise the child in the ways of the spiritual practices of that faith. So these relationships are also extraordinarily important, and they are, in fact, healing relationships. They provide boundaries that we need to live in, and they provide resources for us, resources to help us live, all right? So all of that needs to be present if you want to live in a healing place, a healing family. I talked about triads. One of the most important is mother, father, child, and they make loving family are the words that go in the center of that. Energy is flowing in all directions. Again, all around the triangle and into the center. Into the center is where we want to live. The third level of sacred bonds are those very close personal relationships that we have. Our very best friends, okay? People that we trust. Therapist, client, teacher, student, okay? Doctor, patient. These are all relationships that require the best that we have to offer. That we, if we're in one, it's a give and take. Hopefully, we're in more than one. And as we progress through, you will establish more and more of these, because one of the most important ones, and you will become the giver on that part, is compassionate one, needy one, that relationship. More relationships, okay, sacred bonds. The fourth level, and this one is going to sound a little esoteric to you, or a little hard to understand, but I want to say it anyway. And it's the level of relationship with people you've never met. Okay? Now you're saying, how in the world can I have a relationship with somebody I've never met? Well, there are needy people all over the world. There are starving people. There are people who are in great danger because of social or political events that have gone on around them. And we have ways, our churches, for example, and again, all faiths have these, but we have ways to donate some of the resources that we have to these people in these other countries. So you can have a relationship with somebody you never met. Just give them something. Give them something to help them be alive. And know that they will be grateful. You will hear back from the people who help administer your gift about the needs and the successes of what you're donating. So that's a kind of relationship, and you will be amazed at how good you can feel, how much healing can actually take place in you when you acknowledge this fourth level of sacred bond relationship. So that's it. Those are the kinds of healing relationships that we are given, those four categories. And again, the issue is how deep and how strong can we make them. So thanks again for listening, for tuning in on YouTube. And again, you can help me by subscribing to my channel, helping get the word out. If you know somebody who really might benefit from this kind of instruction, I would be pleased to have more people looking in. And that's now, of course, always available. So thanks again. Next time, we will continue again on the next step on the healing pathway.